In 1956, as the Cold War was going on, a revolution began to start in Hungary. It was said to be the first major threat to the Soviets ever since the USSR drove the Nazis out of Eastern Europe. Many people lived under the leadership of Matthias Rákosi and grew tired of the communist state. He also started the AVH, which was security police that would go and purge the people who were against the Communist Party. People who were against them were often imprisoned or even executed. The revolution began when Hungarian students compiled a list of demands for Hungary and broadcast it throughout Budapest. These demands were 16 points that contained important national policy demands. As they began to report these demands, the news began to spread, and chaos and violence began to erupt through the capital. In the afternoon of October 23, 1956, over 20,000 protesters stood next to the statue of Józef Bem, who was a hero of Poland and Hungary. Many people began to chant their national song and began to cut the coat of arms from the Hungarian flag. Soon after that, they began to bring down the 30-foot statue of Stalin that was built in 1951. All was left was his boots on the pedestal, and many protesters began to fill it up with the Hungarian flag. During this time, a large crowd began to circle Radio Budapest and wanted their demands to be broadcasted. The crowd grew bigger and bigger until the AVH began to shoot tear gas and started to open fire on the crowd, killing many people. The protesters reacted violently and began to set fire to police cars and take arms from military depots. They began to fight against the AVH. At 2 a.m. on October 24th, the Soviet tanks began to roll in, and behind them were many Soviet soldiers who guarded key bridges and crossroads. The revolutionaries set up barricades all around Budapest and began to capture and seize Soviet tanks. Also, on that day, Imre Nagy announced on the radio for the protesters to end their violence and promised reforms afterwards. But many people ignored this and continued to fight on. Here is a video that sums up the protest.
This is battered Budapest under the brutal Russian boot. Soviet tanks roam the streets amid the ruins they made, as communist secret police hunt down heroic freedom fighters. Here for all the world to see is grim evidence of the brutality and savagery with which the red tanks blasted a defenseless people and their city. 2 Budapest cameramen risked execution to make these pictures and smuggle them out of Hungary. 25,000 Hungarians are dead. Budapest is ravaged, but the communist masters cannot crush a proud people. Defiantly they chant, "We shall be free." Refusing to live under Soviet tyranny, refugees stream into Austria. They flee with little more than the clothes on their backs. At journey's end, they can smile again. Border guards beckon the refugees on as they brave the quicksand of an icy quagmire. The Russians have blockaded highways and destroyed bridges in a desperate effort to halt the mass exodus. But in 6 weeks, 120,000 Hungarians slip out of their troubled homeland. A refugee shows how the communists are spraying the escape routes with machine guns. Even the bravest must weep at leaving the country where their ancestors have lived, worked, and died for more than 1,000 years. A flag marks the border as the flight to freedom goes on. Carrying his son on his back, a father struggles through the shoulder-high marsh grass. Traveling day and night in freezing cold, the refugees stumble, numb and dazed, onto Austrian soil. By cover of night, other Hungarians make their escape on a tree trunk spanning a 14-foot border canal. Eager hands reach out to pull each refugee to safety. An endless flow of displaced and homeless, fleeing the black night of Soviet terror. Austrian relief agencies provide transportation to 63 refugee camps, where the uprooted Hungarians are housed and fed. None are turned back despite crowded conditions. 1,300 refugees find asylum in Holland, one of 16 countries offering new homes to the latest victims of communist inhumanity. The free world, which suffered through Hungary's gallant struggle for freedom, opens its hearts to the homeless masses. More than 50,000 are moved from Austria to other European countries. Out of the tragedy of Hungary has come an international mercy mission that knows no boundaries and no limits. Daily in Vienna, trains wait to take the children of Soviet oppression to a new home and a new life. This train is bound for Switzerland, where officials ask only 2 questions, name and birth date. Yesterday's suffering is eased by the hope of tomorrow. At the American Embassy in Vienna, crowds wait in the streets for admission to the United States. President Eisenhower offers asylum to 21,000, and officials work around the clock to speed them on their way. The first plane load arrives at McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey. Stepping out into the crisp air of America, the refugees have found the freedom for which their countrymen yearned and fought and died. Offers of homes and jobs, clothing and food await them. By January 1st, all 21,000 refugees will have reached the United States in the biggest air-sea mercy operation in our nation's history. Under the stars and stripes, these Hungarians can work and wait and hope for the day when Hungary will be free.
The protesting and revolts lasted on October 28th, and by the 30th all fires have ceased. After the long protests and fighting, a new Hungarian national government began to form, and thousands of Hungarians were arrested. Approximately 13,000 were imprisoned and several hundred were killed. Many others fled to Austria, and those who stayed behind were prisoners. It was also said that 4,000 Hungarians died during the revolt. In the end, Nagy was trialed and then executed, and by November 14th, the order within Hungary had been restored, and Kadar was then put in place as chairman, and Soviet rules began to come back. Also, once the new government was formed, the AVH was disbanded and wanted to reestablish their free elections once more. Although all of this has happened, Hungary was a key part to the Cold War because it caused the people in Europe to not try and stop communism or do anything about the Iron Curtain. Many people were killed and slaughtered over the injustice throughout the months. Men and even children fought for what was right. They will not be forgotten. They are the true heroes. They made history.